You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam, streaming on iTunes, Google Podcasts, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 66 of the DCAU Review. I am your host, Cal. With me, as he always is, the other host, and the guy that runs our Twitter account. We call him the DCAU Review Twitter Guru. Well, I call him that. Most people just call him Liam. Liam, welcome to episode 66 of the DCAU Review.
Yeah, as we continue through this month of August with our reviews of Batman Beyond, we've got the Season 1 finale to talk about today. We've officially made it through the entire first season, and it's a pretty darn noteworthy one as far as season finales go.
Yeah, it truly is. It sort of, I guess, puts a bow on the entire Derek Powers, Blight, Terry sort of revenge story or vengeance story with Derek Powers, and it's definitely, I don't know that it was intended to be the last time we see Blight, but as we'll discuss on the episode today, and of course we are talking about the Batman Beyond episode called Ascension, and deals with a new character, Derek Powers' son, Paxton, and also, like I said, it happens to be the last time in the Batman Beyond series where we would see the character of Blight, which is weird because this season sets him up as such a pivotal anchor to Batman, the Batman Beyond Rogues Gallery, and this is the last time he's heard from.
Yeah, and I asked around a little bit about this, some of the other DCAU content creators on Twitter, and talked to the guys from the Watchtower database, as well as John Trumbull, who's actually writing a book about the DCAU. Nobody really had a firm answer. I'll try to update everybody on Twitter once, if we ever find one, beyond kind of what we found in an article that wasn't heavily sourced, which sort of implied that there's a mandate from Kids WB to kind of focus more on the high school stuff in the future seasons, which obviously does happen. So that makes as much sense as anything. But the fact that he never came back even for, a one-off, Revenge of Blight type story is kind of surprising. But he does also appear in some of the comics and stuff they did over the years after this. But as far as in the actual show, in the actual animated form, this is it.
Yeah, which feels, we will jump into plot to start, and as we always do. Well, before I start jumping up onto my soapbox here, let's get the official synopsis from IMDb for this week's episode, Liam.
Of course, and this is, of course, the synopsis for Ascension, written by Bob Goodwin and directed by Yukio Suzuki. And the synopsis reads as such. As Derek Powers' medical condition as Blight worsens, he calls his estranged son home for help. However, an enemy hidden in plain sight has other plans for him that eventually involve Batman as well.
There you go. One of the other nuggets that I did pull out of that same article that is a little more easily verifiable was the fact that Yukio Suzuki, this was his second directed episode. He also directed The Winning Edge, of course, the episode that had Bane and slappers and all that hullabaloo. But interestingly enough, the animation team apparently was a Japanese animation team, and I got to say, once we get to talking about animation visuals, this is a very good visual episode. But since we're starting with plot, as we always do, Liam, I'll let you give your 2 cents first, and then I have a bit of a soapbox for this episode itself. What were your thoughts for Ascension?
I think it's kind of underwhelming. Like a lot. This is, like, as we mentioned, this is a big pivotal episode. This is theoretically the big moment coming to a head. This is the man. We find out that the supervillain that Terry's met a couple times, and has been fighting to foil for as many episodes as there have been so far, the whole season, is also the man responsible for orchestrating Terry's dad's death all the way back in Rebirth Part 1. And they do a little bit of Terry sort of being a little hard nosed about this, and kind of being glad that he may have had a hand in turning Powers into Blight, and you kind of feel like you're setting it up where there's almost going to be this really big physical confrontation, and maybe Terry's going to have to make a really strong decision about, whether to maybe try to kill Blight or to take him in. But we don't really get that. It's wrapped up in this story of Derek Powers bringing his son in, as we mentioned, and his son sort of taking the company out from under him, and just kind of using his blightness as a reason to get a hold of the board, and then he tries to kill Batman when Batman won't go along with him trying to kill Blight. And then from there, Blight just sort of goes crazy and blows up the sub, and that's the end. So I don't know, it felt a little hollow to me personally.
Again, we don't discuss this before we go on the air, our thoughts, so I will preface that by saying I had a very similar feeling. If you want to use a sports analogy for this episode, this is supposed to be the big blow-off between, especially because we know now it's the final appearance of Blight, and maybe they didn't know that at the time, but this is the culmination of the entire first season of Batman Beyond, and it's supposed to be this epic. It's Batman versus the Joker, if you're going to use a it's Superman versus Lex Luthor, or
sure.
Spider-Man versus the Green Goblin, or
exactly.
whatever. Or if it's a sports analogy, this is the Super Bowl, and it ended up coming off a lot like that Seahawks Broncos Super Bowl a couple years ago, where you had the best defense and the best offense in the league, and it was just the most dominated, boring. Like, it was great if you were a Seahawks fan, but man, didn't live up to the hype.
So the game they won like 43-7 or something, right?
Yeah, it was abysmal. It was no fun to watch. The game was over by the end of the first quarter. So enough sports analogies for today. But my point being that this is supposed to be something that is an epic confrontation, and to me, I had an issue, first of all, with the fact that the reveal of Derek Powers to Blight is very, very just anticlimactic. It's within the first 3 minutes of the show, so I get maybe they felt rushed or they had to cram some stuff in there. It's a very bloated show, that's for sure. Like you said, you had introduction of Paxton. You had Paxton is this, prodigal son that's been sent off to another country to run a shell company for Derek, and he's not liked there. And then there's this undercurrent of immigrants or that the natives rather of that country that don't like the Powers, but really it's just Paxton using that storyline as a way to subvert what was really going on. And then
he came up with a very convoluted way to get fish thrown at his dad. And to reveal so quickly, and then you have Terry, the Batman storyline in this episode is the cliched hero. Is he going to go too far? Hero learns a lesson that going too far is not who he really like. He can't go this far because it's not who he really is. He doesn't really want to see Derek Powers killed. He realizes it, but he realizes it too late once he's too blind by his rage to see that this was Paxton's plan all along. It's that cliched story that we've seen done 100 times, and that's fine. That's certainly a way to humanize your hero and to show weakness and show that, he does have this desire for vengeance, and he's right on the edge of this. That's a staple of the Batman character, especially the Bruce Wayne Batman. He walks a very fine line between vengeance and the revenge factor, and how far can he go within vengeance before it's before he crosses the line. Yeah. So you have that, but it just seems so dull
and hollow, like you said, like, oh, he has a throwaway line about feeling proud that he turned him into Blight, and it just doesn't seem like it fits the character. I had high hopes for this episode, being that it was knowing going into it that it's the last time that we see Blight, and you introduce this character of Paxton Powers, who plays a role in a few other episodes after this, and I was left disappointed. I ended up giving the plot a 4 out of 10.
Wow. Well, I'm not too far off from you. I went 5 out of 10 for my plot, but yeah, I mean, really, just for all those reasons you've covered, maybe this would have worked better as a 2-parter or something. They could have fleshed out the Paxton-Derek relationship a bit more and given more time for Bruce and Terry to have their side. It's almost, because that could almost become a dark reflection there of, Paxton's relationship with Derek and, Terry's relationship with Bruce. And, you could really if you had maybe 2 parts, you could have really gotten into the meat of this and done a lot of comparing and contrasting of those relationships. And we don't really get any of that. In fact, I was actually expecting, I thought there's a couple of other episodes in this series where, Terry sort of mouths off to Bruce, or he and Bruce have some sort of disagreement. And then at the end, him and Bruce kind of have a heart-to-heart and make up. That happens in Meltdown, Mr. Freeze episode. It happens in Dead Man's Hand, the Royal Flush Gang episode. And I was kind of waiting for that to be the end of this episode and kind of put a little bow on it as, one last heart-to-heart about how Terry realized that, that's not what Batman, rooting for death for your foes or is not what Batman does. You're kind of waiting for that one last lesson to be taught at the end of the episode, but it's really not there. And yeah, it's kind of a bummer, honestly, that such an important episode of the series kind of went out like such a fart.
Do you know what we do get, though? We get a scene of Blight eating a sandwich.
We sure do.
What the? I mean, I get, are you supposed to feel sympathetic for the character? They involve Paxton's secretary. There's some sort of relationship where she has some sort of emotional connection, and I know from reading that they play into that further on down the line in the comics. They tie into it, but it's nonsense. It's a scene that doesn't need to be there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And yeah, there's a little bit, that's another thing that they sort of touch on but don't really delve into, the idea that Powers is sort of he's going more and more mad as both in the terms of anger and the terms of his sanity. But it's again kind of a 0 to 60 transformation. And then yeah, there is that moment in the sub with the secretary where it kind of seems like you're supposed to feel a little sorry for him, and he's I don't know, man. It just feels like it was a lot of missed opportunities here, and especially knowing that this is the end. It's a bummer, man.
Yeah, and one last thing the entire dialogue written between Terry and Derek Powers, or Blight, in that final scene where he's finally found him, he's doing the thing where he's throwing his voice down the submarine. That was great. And then you get to the point where Terry finally confronts him and he says, "You killed my father." And Derek Powers clearly is just like, "Well, I've killed so many people that right. Doesn't say anything." Well, and then Terry's just like, "Well, that's all you get." That was so bad. That was such a bad back and forth. I don't know. Then what's the point of doing it? What's the point of saying it? If there's no payoff to it, there's no payoff to it at all. It doesn't matter at that point. There was nothing that Terry learned in that moment, oh, this guy is such a bad dude anyway, I'm just going to let him die. If that was the case, he's like, how many more people has he killed? And you have this realization, and Terry has to deal with going forward in the series that he decided to let Blight die because he felt like he deserved it, or the opposite of man, this guy deserves to be taken into custody and brought to justice. Think of how many other people that he that don't know what happened to their family members or whatever that he has killed. He needs to be brought to justice. There's just that line is said, and there's nothing. There's no response to it. There's no payoff.
No, yeah, I that's a really great point too. It's disappointing on nearly every level.
Yeah. All right. So why don't we balance this out? We'll go to our next category then, Liam. We'll talk about animation and visuals. As I stated before, this was done by one of the Japanese animation teams, and visually, this episode, especially if you watch it with the new upgraded HD re-enhanced, whatever they want to call that version on the DC Universe streaming service. By the way, we don't get paid to advertise or shill for them, but we would. We would gladly accept your dollars, DC, just to shill. It's a great deal. If you haven't checked it out yet, I think there's a 7-day free trial. You can check it out. But make sure there's a lot of good stuff on there, but especially the DCAU is on there. Check out the new HD versions of all of the episodes, especially Batman Beyond. But anyway, this episode, Liam, is a beautiful episode.
Yeah, I liked it. Maybe not as much as you liked it, as it turns out. But
okay.
Not necessarily enough for the disagreement alarm. I thought it was good, but I really liked the initial fight scene at the start of the episode where Blight and his men are trying to steal more skin, I guess, for whatever the material they used to make his fake skin. Right. And Batman thwarts it. I thought that was had a lot of good punch to it, and I did think the action and some of the visualization of Blight's powers in the sub at the end were very cool as well. But and there's some other cool little visual things. We see the bat signal, which is pretty random, but it's a cool little nod. And the other thing visually I want to mention is that did Paxton Powers? This might just be me. He looks like the DA from Mask of the Phantasm.
Okay,
Arthur
yep.
Reeves.
That's pretty. It's pretty close.
Maybe it's just a guy with black hair and that nose and a cleft chin, but it looked a lot like Arthur Reeves to me with a different haircut.
That's a good call. You pull it out. Yeah, I feel like Arthur Reeves had a little bit more of an angular face and a more Joker-like appearance. I think that was, I don't know, we discussed that back on the archives. If you go back, I believe it was our 8th episode, way back in the archives. You can check out our review of Mask of the Phantasm. But I think that we mused that may have been a red herring of some kind to make you think that, I don't know, that the Joker was somehow involved, or I don't know, because he does have a very Joker-like face and design in that. But I can definitely see he's a little more square-jawed, but definitely the way that his character looks in general, I get some Arthur Reeves from that. That's not too far off.
Yeah, and then because we kind of touched on it, I didn't think the Blight transformation in this episode was great. Like, I like when it first starts and it just sort of the skin cracks around his eyes and his eyes glow. Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, it gets all right. I think when he gets in the fake protester's face and like his ear is falling off and stuff, that actually looks pretty cool. He almost begins to resemble like a radioactive Two-Face or something in that scene.
Sure.
And I thought the brief physicality between Blight and old Bruce Wayne is pretty good too. But that's kind of my big notes from that. I thought the action was mostly very good, and there's some other kind of interesting little visuals. What about you though? What were your big picture animation thoughts?
I actually found some likes in the small things. Really appreciated. There's a scene where Terry's flying the Batmobile, at least one, if not two scenes where he's flying the Batmobile, and the camera sort of pans around him in a 3D-like pan within the Batmobile. There's a lot of him standing in front of shots of the moon towards the end of the episode. The aforementioned interaction with the bat signal was cool. My only gripe, by the way, they did the old Super Friends trick where they actually reversed the bat signal colors in the sky. I even rewound it to double check it, but the bat symbol itself was lit up like that was the light was shining like that was the light as opposed to the light shining around the black bat. So they did a little bit of fudgery there, which brought my score down. The old Super Friends trick, the inverted bat. But yeah, it was. I think visually, Blight is. I mentioned it certainly in the Mr. Freeze episode, which is, again, you can find in the archives at DCAUreview.com. But Blight is just a visually pleasing character to look at. The glowing green with the offset of the black skeleton, just, it's great. It's so, to borrow a phrase from one of our favorite podcasts, he's so toyetic. Like how they haven't made, seriously, how they haven't made a screen accurate. Blight has had 2 action figures. One came from a Happy Meal, and one came in the actual Batman Beyond series. And we're showing our deep nerddom here. But as a collector of action figures, Blight has had 1 action figure in the Batman Beyond series, and it was not screen accurate. So this guy, it just looks like an action figure deserves an action figure, and just love looking at him. It was a great design. It saddens me that we don't see him again in the series because it's such a visual that pops off the screen. The glowing green plays off of Batman's dark black costume and the overall general darkness of Gotham City anyway. His powers, being able to kind of in this episode, he does a lot of shooting of energy balls, for lack of a better term. He sort of uses his nuclear powers to manifest these orbs and throw them, and that certainly adds to visuals as well. But yeah, I thought this episode it was very smooth. It looked visually pleasing, and because everything else in this episode I wasn't necessarily pleased with, I gave it a higher score just because I was pleased with it. But I ended up giving animation an 8 out of 10.
Okay, so we weren't that far off, as it turned out. I went 7 out of 10.
Okay.
I think for all the reasons you mentioned, the shot at the end of Terry gets the 2 thugs out, and he turns back to look at the sub, and you just see all this green light shooting out of it as the explosion starts. They almost look like strobe lights or something. It's really, really well done.
Yes, the radiation sort of explodes. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's the shot where he's screaming his son's name and just kind of exerting, and all of this energy is coming off of him. And there's a spot where he goes to try to get Paxton, and Paxton runs up some metal stairs, and Blight grabs a hold of the banister, and immediately the metal stairs all break and start to melt. So they did do a really, really good job of visualizing all of his powers.
Agreed.
No pun intended.
Yep. Actually, many puns intended.
Absolutely.
All right, let's move on to our next category, Liam. I don't have a ton to say about music. Kind of sat in the background for me for most of the episode. There wasn't anything that stood out in particular. I think in that final scene, there's some somewhat, I don't know, it's supposed to be tragic. Again, this goes back to the plot and not knowing how you're supposed to feel. It's almost like they wanted you to feel sympathetic for Derek Powers, but he's this evil mastermind that's killed Terry's dad. So it's just conflicting with what the story is in and of itself. But I ended up giving music 5 out of 10.
Yeah, I went 6 out of 10. I liked the music in the opening scene and the opening fight between Terry and Blight and his men, and they kind of bring the same theme back for the action, the sub fight at the end there. So I liked that. And then the rest of the episode is it's pretty somber in the middle. It's this really kind of soft, somber synth music for the most part. So it's kind of it mostly holds back for it's
sandwich eating music. I'm pretty sure it's sandwich eating music.
That's our new term for quiet synth.
Sandwich eating music.
The old sandwich eating music. But yeah, I went 6 out of 10 for music. I did like the the music that played during the 2 big fight scenes. But yeah, for the rest of it, it was pretty much a non-factor.
All right, let's move on to our last category. It's going to be voice acting, Liam. So let's talk about our voice actors. We have at least one new voice. We got a voice for the introduction of Paxton Powers, and of course we have some returning cast voices too. Tell us about our players from this week.
Yeah, so just a minor one I'm going to mention because of the trivia. We had Tress McNeil as Miss Winston, the secretary, who is only interesting because she was Dot on the Animaniacs.
Okay, there you go.
That's maybe another reason I'm surprised they didn't do more with like these various characters. Is like they went out and got like a pretty great talented voice actress, and then she has about 4 lines in the whole episode.
And then is never. Maybe, well, is she heard from again? I know Paxton comes back. Does she work for?
I don't think so. I don't think she's ever seen again.
That's very bizarre then.
Yeah, so that's a shame. But anyway, and then we have, speaking of Paxton Powers, we have one Carrie Elwes playing Paxton Powers, who people would probably know best as Wesley from The Princess Bride.
Okay.
Also known as the Robin Hood in Robin Hood Men in Tights, and he's one of the main dudes in the first Saw movie, and possibly other of the Saw movies. I've never seen them, but I know he was like the main dude in the first one. So
people just know him from Princess Bride, if you did,
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah, he was also on a couple episodes of Psych that I really liked. If we want to get real deep about this, but anyway,
that's your next podcast project, no doubt. A Psych.
Yes.
A Psych/community podcast.
The Psych cast.
There we go. Now we're talking.
We'll workshop it, and I got to find a host, another co-host.
Another co-host. That's right. You were right. You ran out of siblings. So, well, male siblings. So I guess you're going to go to our sister for that.
Yeah, they're go to our sister, or find someone else in the world that likes the show's Psych and Community. But
I think you have a thing going here with people we're related to. Anyway, we're off on a rabbit trail. I got to be honest. I hated his performance. I thought it was dry. I thought he was bad. It sounded like he was reading all of his lines. There was no emotion behind what he was saying. The dude's a fine actor, because I'm not one of those people that thinks Princess Bride is the greatest movie of all time. I think there's weirdly two camps. I think there's people that think that the Princess Bride is the greatest movie of all time, and then there are people who are just like, it was okay. And if you're not the people that love it, the people that love it think that there's something wrong with you. So I'm okay with that. But the dude acted in that movie, from my recollection. Nothing stands out as him being terrible. I just don't know that he was cut out to be a voice actor in this case, because it was bad.
Yeah, like he has to your point, he's like a really expressive face. He's a very good like comedic actor, and doing things. I know he's done a lot of stage work as well, and yeah, for whatever reason, it's just his voice alone is not all that interesting in this episode. In fact, when Paxton Powers comes back later on in the series, he's actually recast. So this is the one and only time we hear Mr. Elwes playing Paxton Powers. But yeah, he's got, it's a big moment in the series. First, when we learn that the guy who had showed up as a protester in the board meeting was actually in Paxton's employ, and then at the end when he's talking, giving his big villain speech to his dad about and to Batman about when he's turned the tables on them. But it's pretty lame. It's pretty lame to say the least. Other than that, of course, we have Sherman Howard returning for his final his curtain call as Derek Powers / Blight. He's really.
What do you think of his performance?
I liked it. I thought he did a better job in his performance of showing Derek Powers' descent into further madness as the episode went on, where maybe the writing failed him a bit. I thought his performance did a good job, because the first scene where he's yelling at his doctors, he kind of catches himself and realizes that they're right, that the charade can't go on, and he makes a call to his son, and he seems to be trying to be very like honest and vulnerable with his son, and then he's betrayed by him, also obviously Batman's harassing him, so it's like he's just, by the end of that episode, he's almost a complete animal. I really love the line when he grabs the protester and says, "Do you want to talk about poison? I am poison." I thought that was just brilliantly delivered.
Yeah, that was good. I think you're right. I think my initial thoughts were that it was inconsistent performance because towards the end he does not sound like the same character, and I think you're right. You pointed out that because it's not his fault that the writing it was so abrupt. It's an abrupt turn from he's slipping into that, and we saw that in the episode with Mr. Freeze. What's the title of that episode? I keep
Meltdown.
Meltdown, right? In Meltdown, he's kind of slipping into that point, but he has that sinister type delivery when he gives the line of "Behold, there will be a blight upon the land." Like it's such a sinister. Yeah, it's delivered with a more sinister undertone as opposed to by the end of this episode, he's basically Skeletor, like in both looks and the delivery of his voice. He's just insane. So I guess you're right. It has more to do with the character writing. I was a little thrown off just because of how that sinister undertone took in, and even at the beginning of the episode, it's more sinister than it is insanity. But I guess you're right. It has more to do with the writing of the episode than his actual performance.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. You're right. It's a far cry from I can't remember if it was in Shriek or maybe even going as far back to the first Ink episode where Bruce and Terry and him are talking in the Wayne Powers building, and he's sort of openly taunting Terry for his dad being dead.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, it's certainly different. Like I said, I think it was meant to reflect how he's just fully gone off the deep end. But unfortunately the creative side of this episode didn't exactly match up with the voice acting performances. And then of course we got to mention him because it's their show. Will Friedle as Batman / Terry, and Bruce Wayne as Batman / Bruce Wayne. Kevin Conroy as Bruce Wayne / Batman.
He is Bruce Wayne. He is Batman. So
he's going to be playing him in live action, by the way, in the CW big crossover at the end of this year. So
that was a huge piece of news this week. So
lost my mind when I heard that, but
it's going to be amazing.
But anyway, yes. So they have. I think Terry and Bruce have some in their brief interactions have some interesting back and forth. The scene we mentioned where they're at Wayne Manor and they're sort of arguing, and the even the little interaction they have when after Blight escapes in the boardroom where Batman goes to help him up and they have to play it like they don't know each other. I thought was well done in the voice acting there. But overall, I guess we can get to scores here. My score is a kind of barely over middle of the road 6 out of 10 for this episode.
Mine's right there. I went 5. Paxton just brings everything down for me, and it was really hard to, because there's so much dialogue and so much rests on that character. He's given the main role, and it just kind of craps the bed with it. So, again, as an actor, the guy is fine. Not very talented person. Just was not the performance I think that was needed for this episode. So, Liam, that brings us to our final scores for the day, totaling everything up. It looks like I come to a final score of 22 out of 40, which, if I had to guess, is going to be the lowest score thus far for a Batman Beyond episode, other than maybe
Golem.
I would say, didn't we hate Golem? Yeah, I think Golem was one that we were not a fan of. So it sucks, as we said before. Well, I'll let you give your score.
Yeah, mine is a pretty similar 24 out of 40.
We've been very similar the last couple of weeks. We've been within 2 points every week.
Yeah, it's I guess as we always say, we don't talk about scores, but we are related. So
DNA is shared.
Yes, so maybe that's part of it. But yeah, I mean, like we said, it's kind of a bummer of a note to end this first season, which has been mostly really strong. And but fear not, true believers. Am I allowed to say that on a DC podcast?
No, you said it on Twitter this week, and I almost told you to delete it because stop calling our fans true believers. That's Stan Lee, who, you know how I feel about Stan Lee. God rest his soul.
Sure. Anyway, we have a few more episodes of Beyond to review this month, so hopefully we get the bad taste out of our mouth from this one.
Yeah, what's the episode we're covering next week, Liam?
It'll be season 2, episode 1 is Splicers, I believe.
Yep, we definitely. I did see that coming up, so that'll be interesting. Now, if it's to be believed, that article that we referenced that we had read regarding why Blight wasn't brought back, and you mentioned that Kids WB may or may not, allegedly may or may not have mandated a more high school focused season, which does sort of line up because that does seem to be the turn of things. Of course, we know, Terry's pseudo sidekick Max is brought in at some point, and we're going to have that to look forward to. But yeah, a lot of storylines all of a sudden start taking place back at Hamilton High, and for better or for worse. So interesting to look to see. Like we said, we had a pretty good average for season 1, rather, and it sort of ended on a sour note. So we'll be interested to see if we can pick up some good consistency for season 2 as we dive into that starting next week.
Yeah, can't wait. I guess we should touch on rewatchability before we roll out.
It's so hard, man.
It's a seminal episode, but because it ends on such a wet fart, I can't even really say that. I would say if you're trying to watch the important episodes from just a story purpose, you should watch this. But if you're only looking for just good episodes to watch, I really can't recommend this one.
Agreed.
So it's important for what happens in it, but you can probably I don't know.
You can Wikipedia
to the middle of it.
I would say you can probably read somebody's review of the episode and get the gist of what happened. Paxton Powers, is, like we said, shows up in an episode or two later on. So if he shows up, you can probably guess who he is based on by his last name. If you didn't watch this episode, right. But yeah, and like we said, it is sort of left on if we didn't mention it is left on a cliffhanger that never gets paid off. You wonder if they originally had plans for Blight to come back and sort of seek revenge against his son or what, but we don't really see that played out at all. And that kind of adds, I think, to the disappointment, because that would have been interesting to see that played out. So, yep. Anyway, Liam, so not necessarily needing to watch it, not a must watch, couldn't recommend it, but if you want to watch what happens to Blight or know what happens to the character because he doesn't show up again, then yeah, I guess you got to watch the episode.
Yeah, we'll leave this up to viewer discretion is advised.
There we go. I like that. All right, so that will do it for this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Don't forget to check Liam out on Twitter at DCAU Review. Give us some feedback. How did you like this episode? Well, I'd love to hear that. Usually when we don't like episodes, it seems that the people that listen to the podcast love those episodes. So it'll be interesting to see if we're just truly contrarian or if there's a general consensus for this episode. Give us your thoughts. What do you think of the voice performances for Paxton? That was something that stood out this week for us. Also, just the sort of rushed storyline and rapid descent into madness for Blight. What about the trying to make Blight into a sympathetic character sort of for, I don't know, a scene or two? Did you like the sandwich eating scene? Was that something that struck a chord with you? Tweet Liam at the DCAU Review. Plus, we'll see if we can get any answers from some of the people that work on the Batman Beyond show that are on Twitter to see their thoughts on why maybe Blight was not used in further seasons. Also, don't forget to check out the archives at DCAUreview.com. We've got 65 episodes for you to check out before this episode. And we'd love to hear your feedback and thoughts on any previous episodes as well. Liam, anything else for you to add?
No, I think that's about it. Definitely give us your thoughts on this episode and kind of Batman Beyond as a whole. Always like to hear that. Love to see.
We got some good feedback on our Elizabeth Warren as Barbara Gordon comparison last week.
Yeah,
so.
that's in the running for the best things you've ever said on the show. By the way, the most poignant at the very least, because. None of
really
us
struck a chord. It struck a chord with some people, that's for sure. They
absolutely did.
Cannot unsee.
Yeah, but I always love getting feedback of any kind on on our show at DCAU Review. If you have the time, you can head over to the Apple Podcast app or any podcast app that allows you to leave reviews and give us a review and give us 5 stars if you would. I know that's a bit of a hassle, but it is really helpful and helps bump us up in that search algorithm that I don't really understand how it works. So
Nobody
you can do
does.
that for us. The internet is a series of tubes.
Yep.
And that's all I really know about it. But yeah, if you could do that and definitely interact with us on Twitter, that's all I really got to say.
Awesome. Well, that will do us for this week's episode. I am Cal.
And I'm Liam.
And we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Goodbye. 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 Goodbye.